She warned the CEO not to step outside. 10 seconds later, the collapsing scaffolding proved her right. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The day began like any other at the city's most exclusive restaurant, La Belle Poche. The restaurant was located in the heart of Manhattan, with its luxurious crystal chandeliers reflecting off the polished marble floors, creating an atmosphere that screamed sophistication. Guests mingled, discussing business deals, stock prices, and the latest tech innovations while enjoying gourmet meals. Behind the scenes, there was another world. The waitstaff, dressed in their black and white uniforms, moved swiftly through the crowded dining area, carrying plates of food to and from the kitchen. Among them was Lila, a quiet and often overlooked waitress who had been working at La Belle Poche for nearly a year. Lila was the type of person who didn't draw attention to herself. She had an unassuming presence and rarely engaged in idle chatter. Yet, there was something about her. Something that made her far more observant than anyone realized. Lila's intuition was sharp, a skill she had developed over years of working in restaurants. She had learned to read people quickly, to sense when something was off. That particular day, Lila felt something she couldn't explain, a strange unease that seemed to hang in the air. She glanced outside through the restaurant's massive windows, the ones that offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. The scaffolding outside, part of an ongoing renovation of the building, looked unstable. Lila's eyes narrowed as she watched a few workers on the scaffolding shift their weight, making it creak dangerously. Her instincts screamed at her, a quiet but urgent warning. As she made her way to the back to check on a few other orders, she saw him. The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech company, Victor Hayes. He was tall, with sharp features and a confident air that made everyone around him take notice. Lila had served him a few times before, and he was always polite but distant. Today, however, he looked distracted, as if something was weighing on his mind. As he stood near the door, ready to step outside for a smoke, Lila couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. She knew she had to act. Without thinking twice, Lila walked up to him. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I strongly advise you not to step outside right now. The scaffolding seems unstable, and I have a bad feeling about it." Hayes glanced at her, the flicker of irritation crossing his face. "I'm fine," he replied, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "I've been in worse situations." He didn't seem to take her warning seriously. Lila's heart raced, but she stood her ground. "Please, Mr. Hayes, just a minute. The weather's unpredictable, and the scaffolding could collapse." Hayes raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "I'm sure it's fine. Thanks for the concern, but I'll be fine," he said, brushing her off with a wave of his hand. And with that, he stepped outside. Lila's chest tightened as she watched him walk towards the door. Her instincts told her that something terrible was about to happen, but there was nothing more she could do. She turned back toward the kitchen, her heart heavy with dread. Seconds later, a deafening crash echoed through the building. Lila spun around, her eyes wide with horror as she saw the scaffolding outside begin to collapse, crashing to the ground with a thunderous noise. Time seemed to slow down as she watched the debris fall in slow motion, inches from where Hayes had just been standing. In that moment, everything came rushing back to her. Her training, her experiences, all the time she had trusted her instincts to keep her safe. Without thinking, she dashed toward the door, shouting for Hayes to get back inside. The chaos outside was overwhelming. The scaffolding had fallen just as she feared, creating a cloud of dust and debris. Hayes, caught off guard, stood frozen in the middle of the chaos. Without a second thought, Lila pushed her way through the wreckage and grabbed him by the arm, pulling him back inside just in time. "You should have listened to me," she said, breathless, her voice shaking with adrenaline. Hayes looked at her, wide-eyed as if seeing her for the first time. He was shaken, but also deeply grateful. I didn't think it was that serious," he stammered, still trying to process what had just happened. Lila simply nodded, her heart still racing. She didn't need to say anything more. She had saved his life, and for the first time, he truly saw her. The restaurant was a flurry of motion as staff scrambled to regain their composure after the chaos outside. Lila stood near the entrance, her heart still racing from the adrenaline of pulling the CEO to safety. The distant sound of sirens filled the air as emergency responders arrived, and the guests who had witnessed the collapse whispered in disbelief. It was hard for anyone to fathom that just moments ago, a life had been in danger, and Lila had been the one to save it. Despite her quick thinking, the reality of the situation was still sinking in. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight. Her job was always behind the scenes, serving drinks, taking orders, and delivering food with a smile. But today, everything had changed. Lila's gaze shifted back to Victor Hayes, who was now standing near the bar, his face pale and his posture stiff. The CEO was usually a picture of control, but now he seemed disoriented, as though the experience had shaken him to his core. She hadn't expected him to be this affected, especially not after his initial dismissiveness. He had barely said a word after she pulled him inside. Lila had expected him to shrug it off, maybe offer a half-hearted thank you, and move on. But instead, he was just staring at the door, his thoughts seemingly a million miles away. She hesitated for a moment before walking over to him. "Mr. Hayes," she said quietly, trying to get his attention. He blinked, as if startled, and turned to face her. For a moment, there was only silence between them, a heavy, charged silence that seemed to fill the space. Lila was about to speak again when he suddenly broke the silence. "You saved my life," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I don't know how to thank you." Lila shook her head. "You don't have to thank me. I just did what anyone would do." But Victor didn't seem to agree. He stepped closer, his eyes still locked onto hers. There was something in his gaze now, a mix of gratitude and curiosity that hadn't been there before. "I don't think most people would have done what you did. You didn't hesitate. You just acted." His words caught her off guard. She had been expecting a simple thank you. But this was different. He was looking at her as though he was seeing her for the first time, as though the woman who had just saved his life was someone completely different from the quiet waitress he had known. Lila felt the weight of his words, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. It was rare for her to be acknowledged like this, especially by someone like Victor Hayes. She was used to being invisible, a face in the crowd. But now, for the first time, she felt seen. And it was unnerving. "I didn't think," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just acted." Victor's expression softened. He took a step back, his hands still slightly trembling from the shock of the situation. "Well, you acted perfectly." He paused, as if considering something, then spoke again. "Listen, I don't know what to say. I don't know how I would have gotten out of there without you." There was a long silence, and then he asked, "How did you know? How did you know the scaffolding would collapse?" Lila swallowed hard. She hadn't been expecting this question. She had always been good at reading people, but she wasn't used to being asked about her instincts. She had no formal training in predicting disasters. It was just something she had developed over the years. But she had to admit, it wasn't just luck that had guided her actions. She had known something was wrong, something about the way the workers were moving, the tension in the air that had made her stomach churn. "I've seen things like this before," she said quietly. "Not exactly the same, but close enough. I guess I've learned to trust my gut." Victor looked at her, as if he was seeing her for the first time. His eyes softened with a kind of respect she wasn't used to. "You're not just a waitress, are you?" he said softly. It was a simple question, but it carried so much weight. Lila felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest, but she quickly pushed it down. "I am," she replied, though there was something in her voice that suggested more. Victor nodded slowly, as if digesting her words. "I think I owe you more than just thanks," he said after a moment. "I'll make sure the right people know what you did today. You've earned my respect." Lila felt a knot form in her stomach. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, especially from someone like Victor Hayes. But there was something about his sincerity that made her heart skip a beat. She had always been a woman of few words, and she didn't know how to handle being praised like this. "It's nothing," she said again, but this time, she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. Victor gave her a small smile, a genuine one, before turning toward the door. "Thank you, Lila," he said, his voice firm but full of appreciation. As he left, Lila watched him go, her mind racing. She had never expected this kind of interaction. In all her years of working at the restaurant, She had never been noticed like this. But as the door clicked shut behind him, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this small act of heroism, had changed everything. Lila stood in the quiet of the restaurant, the hum of activity around her feeling distant as her thoughts replayed the events of the day. She had saved a life. She still couldn't quite believe it. In a way, it felt surreal. It wasn't like her to stand out, to be noticed, especially by someone like Victor Hayes. But the way he looked at her now was different, and it made her feel both seen and vulnerable at the same time. Her usual world of clattering plates and polite smiles had shifted, and the weight of that change settled on her shoulders like an unfamiliar coat. After Victor left, a strange silence fell over the restaurant. The guests, who had been distracted by the near disaster, now returned to their meals, but there was an unspoken awareness in the air. It wasn't just any ordinary night. Lila's role had shifted in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. She returned to her station, her hands mechanically refilling glasses, her mind still wrapped up in the chaos that had just unfolded. But there was one thing she couldn't ignore, the way Victor had looked at her. His gratitude was clear, but so was the curiosity in his eyes. She had noticed it before, when he had thanked her after she had pulled him back inside. She had seen the respect there, but also something else, something deeper. Lila wasn't sure what it meant, but it lingered in her thoughts. Hours passed, and the evening drew to a close. She wiped down the last table, her feet aching from hours of standing. The restaurant was starting to empty, and the usual bustle began to quiet down. But tonight felt different. Her mind kept drifting back to Victor. She had saved his life, but what came next? Did it change anything? Did he even truly understand what she had done for him? She had acted on instinct, not for recognition. But now that the moment had passed, she realized she wasn't sure what he might do with this new knowledge. Lila had always been careful to keep her life private. She didn't invite attention. She wasn't one for being in the spotlight. Her world was simple, built on routine and quiet self-sufficiency. But today had cracked that routine wide open. As she locked up the restaurant, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, half expecting a message from her roommate, but it wasn't. It was a message from an unknown number. Lila, it's Victor Hayes. I hope you're doing okay. I just wanted to make sure you're safe. What happened today? It was no small thing. I can't stop thinking about it. I'd like to talk. Can we meet? Please let me know when you have time. Lila stared at the message for a long time, her heart racing. She hadn't expected this. She wasn't sure what to feel. Victor Hayes, the CEO she had barely spoken to before, wanted to meet with her. Her first instinct was to decline. What could he possibly want from her? He was a billionaire CEO, and she was a waitress. They lived in different worlds, worlds that had never collided in such a way. She knew she should ignore the message, go back to her quiet life. But something in her, something she couldn't quite explain, made her hesitate. He had acknowledged her in a way that no one ever had. He had seen her, really seen her, and that mattered to her more than she cared to admit. She tapped out a quick response. I'm fine. Thank you for checking in. I don't know what to say, but I appreciate it. I'm working tomorrow, but I can meet for a quick coffee afterward if you'd like. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The phone buzzed again almost immediately. That sounds perfect. How about 6 p.m. at the Central Park Cafe? Lila stared at the screen, feeling a rush of nerves flood her body. What was she doing? But deep down, she knew she had to go. There was no turning back. The next evening, Lila arrived at the cafe a little early. The warm autumn air was crisp as she walked through the streets of Manhattan, the city alive with the sounds of people bustling by. Central Park was nearby, its golden leaves swaying gently in the wind. It felt like a world away from the world she knew. She had dressed carefully, in a simple blouse and jeans, her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. She wanted to look presentable, but not like she was trying too hard. She arrived at the cafe just before 6 p.m., her nerves a little more settled now that she was here. She spotted Victor immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, dressed in a dark suit, his posture straight as usual, but there was something different in the way he carried himself tonight. He wasn't the same aloof CEO who had dismissed her warnings earlier. There was a softness in his eyes as he looked up and saw her. Lila, he said, standing up and offering a smile. I'm glad you could make it. She nodded, feeling a little awkward as she sat down. Of course. Thanks for inviting me. They exchanged pleasantries, but there was an underlying tension in the air. Victor seemed unsure of where to begin. I've been thinking about what happened yesterday, he said, his voice low. And I can't stop wondering what made you act the way you did. Lila shifted in her seat, unsure of how to respond. She had never been the type to explain herself, but there was something about his question that made her want to share. I don't really know, she said slowly. I've been around danger before, and something told me I had to act. Victor studied her. Closely, his brow furrowed. You saved my life, Lila. I'm not sure how to repay you for that. Lila felt a strange pang in her chest. She wasn't looking for repayment. She never had been. You don't have to repay me, she said softly. I just did what anyone else would have done. Victor shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. No, you didn't. Most people wouldn't have. Most people would have let me walk right out there. There was a long pause as Lila tried to find the right words. I'm not most people, she finally said. I guess I'm just someone who doesn't ignore what's right in front of me. As the days passed, Lila found herself caught in a strange whirlwind of emotions. What started as a routine evening at the restaurant had somehow spiraled into something completely unexpected. Victor Hayes, the powerful CEO who had barely acknowledged her existence before, had become a part of her life in a way she couldn't explain. Every time she thought about the incident with the scaffolding, she couldn't help but feel the weight of his gratitude, the way his eyes had looked at her, like she was someone important. It was a strange sensation, and it stayed with her. The following evening, after another busy shift at the restaurant, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside her. She had saved Victor's life, but what did that mean for her now? She had always kept her distance from people, focusing on her work and the simple life she had built. But now, she was forced to confront the fact that her life had become entangled with someone far outside her usual world. She walked home that night with her thoughts swirling. The crisp autumn air nipped at her skin, and the streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk. She had always found solace in the quiet of the night, in the stillness between the chaos of her day. But tonight, the quiet felt different. The thought of Victor, of their conversation over coffee, echoed in her mind. It was clear that he hadn't just been thanking her for saving him. He had been searching for something more. She knew it. His words had been genuine, but there was an underlying curiosity there, a need to understand why she had acted so swiftly. Lila wasn't used to being seen like that. She wasn't used to someone looking at her and seeing beyond the uniform, beyond the waitress who served drinks and cleared plates. No one had ever taken the time to really look at her before, let alone ask questions about her life. But Victor had, and that made her uncomfortable. She wasn't sure if she liked it. As she entered her apartment, she tossed her keys on the counter and went straight to her bedroom. She needed rest, but her mind refused to let her sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation she'd had with Victor earlier that day. He had asked about her instincts, about her life. She had tried to keep it brief, not wanting to reveal too much. But she knew that it wasn't just the scaffolding that had intrigued him. It was her. There was a knock at the door, interrupting her thoughts. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding. Who could it be this late at night? She hesitated for a moment before getting up to answer the door. When she opened it, she was taken aback. Standing there, looking somewhat hesitant, was none other than Victor Hayes. Lila, he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken words. I hope I'm not disturbing you. What are you doing here? Lila asked, her voice a mix of surprise and confusion. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon, especially not at her apartment. I know this might seem strange, Victor said, running a hand through his hair, but I couldn't stop thinking about what you said the other day. About acting on instinct. Lila raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this conversation was headed. You came all the way here just for that? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He nodded slowly, his expression serious. I need to understand. I need to know why you acted the way you did, why you didn't hesitate when the rest of us might have. Lila felt a strange tug in her chest. She hadn't expected this kind of visit. She wasn't sure what to say or how to react. I just did what felt right, she said after a moment, her voice quieter than she intended. It wasn't about you or anyone else. It was just instinct. Victor stood there for a moment, studying her, as if trying to gauge whether she was being completely honest. Then he stepped inside without waiting for her to invite him. I want to know more about you, he said, his tone earnest. I know this is probably the last thing you want, but I can't help it. I can't stop thinking about what happened, about you. Lila's heart raced as she processed his words. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to be so determined, so open about his curiosity. Why? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why me? Victor looked at her, and for the first time, she saw vulnerability in his eyes. Because you're not like anyone I've met before, he said softly. You didn't just save my life. You made me realize that there's more to this world than business meetings and boardrooms. You made me see that instinct, that human connection, can sometimes be more important than all the wealth and power in the world. Lila stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. She had always kept people at arm's length, never letting anyone get too close. But Victor wasn't like anyone else. He was powerful, yes, but there was something about him that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't invisible to him. Maybe she wasn't just the waitress who saved his life. Maybe she was someone who mattered. The thought unsettled her. She had never allowed herself to think that way, to believe that she was someone worth noticing. She had always thought she was just another face in the crowd. But now, Victor was looking at her like she was something more. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she wanted to run from it or embrace it. I don't know what you want from me, she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. But I'm not who you think I am. Victor took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. I think I'm starting to figure that out, he said softly. But I'd like to learn more. If you'll let me. Lila sat there, the silence between them hanging heavy in the air. Victor's words had been unexpected, and for the first time in a long while, Lila wasn't sure how to respond. She had always been someone who preferred to remain in the background, someone who kept her emotions in check. But with Victor standing so close, looking at her with such intensity, everything felt different. It was as if the walls she had built around herself were slowly starting to crumble, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to let someone in, especially someone like him. He was a CEO, a man who could have anyone he wanted, who had a world of power and wealth at his fingertips. And here he was, in her small apartment, asking about her. She could hardly believe it. I know this might be overwhelming, Victor said, his voice softer now. But I don't want to pretend like I'm not curious about you. Lila looked away for a moment, trying to steady herself. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, and she certainly wasn't used to feeling this vulnerable. Curious about what? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor took a deep breath, as if choosing his words carefully. Curious about you, he repeated. About why you acted the way you did, why you didn't hesitate when you saw the danger outside. Lila swallowed, her throat dry. She had always kept her reasons to herself, never sharing too much with anyone. It was safer that way. But now, standing in front of Victor, she felt a strange pull, an urge to tell him more. I don't know why I did it, she said, her voice barely audible. I just saw something that others didn't. I've learned to trust my instincts. Victor nodded slowly, his eyes searching hers. I understand that, but I think there's more to it. You didn't just save me, Lila. You saved all of us. And I want to know more about you, about who you are. Lila felt her heart beat faster. She wasn't sure if it was fear or something else, but the words had struck a chord with her. She had never been someone who wanted to be seen, never someone who wanted to be noticed. But now, Victor was making her feel like maybe she mattered. Maybe she wasn't just invisible after all. I don't want to be part of your world, she said suddenly, her words spilling out before she could stop them. I'm not like the people you're used to. I don't fit in that world. Victor looked at her, his expression softening. You don't have to be part of my world to matter, Lila. You matter because of who you are, not because of the world you come from. His words made her pause, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. He was right, in a way, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong in his world. She wasn't like the other women he knew, the ones who wore designer clothes and moved in circles she couldn't even imagine. And yet, here he was, standing in her modest apartment, looking at her like she was someone worth knowing. I don't know what you want from me, Lila said, her voice shaky. I'm not what you think I am. I'm not someone who belongs in your world. Victor took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. I don't need you to be someone you're not, he said softly. I just want to get to know you. I want to understand why you see the world the way you do, why you acted the way you did. Lila felt a lump form in her throat. She had always been afraid of letting anyone in, of being seen for who she truly was. But with Victor, there was something different. There was no judgment in his eyes, no expectation, just a genuine desire to understand her. She had never felt that before. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she had to hide. "I'm just a woman trying to make a living," Lila said quietly. "I've been through a lot, and I've learned to trust my instincts. That's all I can tell you." Victor smiled, a small, knowing smile that made Lila's heart skip a beat. "That's all I need to know," he said, his voice warm. "I don't need you to be anything else." There was a long silence between them, a moment of understanding that felt like a bridge being built between two worlds. Lila didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if she was ready for whatever Victor was offering, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she could take a step forward. Maybe she didn't have to hide anymore. Maybe, just maybe, she could let someone in. "Thank you," Victor said softly. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for showing me something I didn't even know I needed to see." Lila looked at him, her eyes searching his face, and for the first time, she felt like she wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just a waitress, a faceless figure in the background. She was someone worth noticing. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The following week, Lila found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions that she couldn't quite navigate. Her life, which had once felt so simple, so routine, was now tangled in ways she had never expected. Victor Hayes, the CEO she had saved just days before, had become a part of her life in a way she wasn't prepared for. The quiet moments in her small apartment, the late nights after her shifts, had all shifted. The world she had carefully built for herself, one of independence and solitude, was now uncertain. As much as she tried to ignore it, the pull between her and Victor was undeniable. The more she saw of him, the more she realized how different her life had become since that moment on the street. The phone call from him that morning had shaken her more than she cared to admit. It was simple, casual even. He just wanted to check in, to see how she was doing. But there was a warmth in his voice that made her pause, made her question what she had been doing with her life. Was she ready for something like this? She wasn't sure. That night, after a long day at the restaurant, Lila found herself walking home in the cool evening air, the streets of Manhattan bustling with life around her. She needed clarity, a moment to herself, but it seemed as though everything had changed. She couldn't stop thinking about him, Victor. He had invited her to dinner again, asking if she wanted to meet. He wanted to talk more, get to know her better, and Lila had agreed. Despite her doubts, despite the confusion swirling in her mind, she knew she couldn't back away from this. The connection she felt was real, even if it scared her. When she arrived at the restaurant, it was exactly as Victor had promised. A quiet corner table, far away from the noise and distractions of the busy city. He stood as she approached, his smile warm but hesitant, as though he wasn't sure what to expect. "I'm glad you came," he said softly, his voice sincere. Lila smiled, though the knot in her stomach hadn't loosened. "I'm glad to be here." They sat down, the menu in front of them, but neither of them seemed to care much about the food. It was the conversation that mattered. As the waiter took their orders, Victor spoke first. "I've been thinking about you a lot, Lila." He looked up at her, his eyes searching. "I don't want to rush you into anything, but I need to be honest. There's something about you that makes me want to know more. Something I can't ignore." Lila's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if it was excitement or fear, but it was real. She had always been cautious about letting people in, especially men like Victor, who lived in a world so far removed from hers. She had always thought she was just the waitress, invisible to the world. But Victor wasn't treating her like that. "I don't know what you want from me," Lila said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm just trying to make sense of everything. I'm not used to this." Victor nodded, as if he understood completely. "I don't want you to feel pressured," he said. "I just need you to know that I want to get to know you. Not because you saved my life, but because you're someone worth knowing." His words left Lila speechless. She had never been the type to open up easily, but with Victor, she felt something different. Something that made her want to let go of her fears and just embrace the moment. "I'm not like the women you know," Lila said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't belong in your world. I'm not. I'm not one of them." Victor leaned in slightly, his gaze softening. "You're right. You're not like anyone I know," he said, his voice low and steady. "And that's exactly why I'm interested in you. Because you're real. You see the world differently. You don't play games." Lila felt her breath catch. He was right. She wasn't like the women he was used to. She wasn't interested in the superficial, the wealth, and the power. She just wanted something real, something that made her feel alive. I don't know if I'm ready for this, she said, her hands fidgeting with the napkin in her lap. I don't know if I can. Be part of your world. Victor reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. You don't have to be part of my world, he said, his voice sincere. I just want to be part of yours. His words hit her like a wave, crashing over the walls she had built around herself. It was the truth, and it felt like it was coming from a place of honesty, not just attraction. Lila's mind raced, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she didn't have to hide. She wasn't invisible. And maybe, just maybe, she could take a chance on this. She looked at Victor, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw him not as the powerful CEO, but as someone who was trying to understand her. Maybe, she said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Maybe I'm ready for this. The words felt like a leap of faith, but they were real. She was ready to take a step forward, to stop hiding from the possibility of something more. For the first time, she wasn't running from the unknown. She was ready to embrace it. The days that followed were a blur for Lila. Every moment she spent away from Victor felt like a tug-of-war between her past, the life she had known, and the new world that was slowly opening up before her. She had always kept a careful distance from people, focusing on her job and the simplicity of her life. But now, everything felt different. The way Victor had looked at her, the way he had genuinely wanted to know her, it was like nothing she had ever experienced. It made her question everything: who she was, what she wanted, and if she was ready to let herself be a part of something bigger. She hadn't heard from him in a few days, and while part of her felt relieved, another part of her missed him. She couldn't deny it. She found herself thinking about him all the time. The warmth of his smile, the way he made her feel seen, the way he was so different from the cold, distant world she had imagined him to be part of. It wasn't just the fact that he had saved her life. It was that he had made her feel like she mattered. And that was a feeling she hadn't had in a long time. The phone rang, breaking her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw his name. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, she hesitated. She had spent the past few days wondering if she was ready to take another step, and now the decision was in her hands. She answered the phone, her voice steady but unsure. Hello, Lila. Victor's voice came through the line, warm and familiar. I was hoping I could see you again. I know you probably have a lot on your mind, but I'd really like to talk more. About us. About everything. Lila closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his words. It had been a few days since they last spoke, and she hadn't expected him to call so soon. But as much as she wanted to push him away, to keep her walls up, there was something in his voice that made her want to take the leap. Okay, she said quietly, her heart pounding. I'll meet you. They agreed on a time and place, and Lila hung up the phone with a mix of excitement and trepidation. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing for sure. This was a moment that would change everything. That evening, Lila found herself standing in front of the restaurant they had agreed to meet at. A small, quiet place tucked away on a side street. It wasn't the type of place she was used to, but there was something about it that made her feel at ease. As she entered, her eyes immediately found Victor. He was sitting at a corner table, looking as composed and confident as ever, but his eyes softened when he saw her. Lila, he said, standing up to greet her with a smile that made her heart flutter. I'm glad you came. She nodded, her nerves getting the better of her. She wasn't sure what to say, but she could feel the connection between them, like an invisible thread pulling them closer. I'm glad to be here, she replied, taking a seat across from him. The waiter brought them drinks, and for a moment, there was an awkward silence between them. Neither of them seemed to know where to start, but eventually, Victor broke the silence. I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other night, he began, his voice serious but soft. About how you acted on instinct. It's something I don't understand, but I think I want to. I think there's a lot more to you than I've seen. Lila looked down at her drink, unsure of how to respond. She had always kept her emotions hidden, buried deep inside, and now Victor was asking her to open up. It felt like too much, but at the same time, she wanted to be honest with him, to let him see who she really was. I don't know what you want from me, she said, her voice shaky. I've never been good at this. I've always kept to myself. Victor reached across the table, his hand gently resting on hers. I'm not asking for anything, he said softly. I just want to know you, to understand why you see the world the way you do. Lila felt her breath catch in her throat. There was no judgment in his eyes, no expectation, just a genuine desire to get to know her. It was something she had never experienced before. Slowly, she nodded, taking a deep breath. I'm not like the women you know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not used to being noticed. Victor gave her a small, reassuring smile. I know, and that's what makes you special. His words hit her like a wave, and for a moment, she felt overwhelmed. She had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. But for the first time, she didn't want to hide anymore. She wanted to be seen. I don't know if I can do this, she said, her voice trembling. But I'm willing to try. Victor squeezed her hand gently, his expression softening. That's all I'm asking for, he said. Just a chance. We don't have to figure it all out right away. Lila felt the weight of his words, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe this could be the beginning of something real. Maybe she wasn't just a waitress, someone invisible in the background. Maybe she could be someone worth loving. The following weeks were a blur for Lila. What had begun as a simple act of kindness had turned into something far more complicated. As the days went by, her feelings for Victor deepened, and the more they talked, the more she realized how different he was from anyone she had ever known. He wasn't just the successful CEO with an empire. He was someone who saw her for who she really was, not just the waitress behind the counter. They spent more time together, meeting after her shifts, talking about everything and nothing, sharing quiet moments in the midst of the chaos of their worlds. Lila's feelings were changing, and with each passing day, she couldn't help but wonder if she was ready for everything that came with being with someone like Victor. Their worlds were so different. She wasn't used to wealth or the lavish lifestyle he led, but Victor never made her feel like she didn't belong. He never pushed her to be something she wasn't, and that was a relief. As much as she tried to hold on to her independence, she couldn't ignore the fact that being with Victor made her feel more alive than she had in years. It was something she couldn't explain. He wasn't perfect, but he was real, and in a world that often felt fake, that meant something. The night they met again after a week of no contact felt different. Victor had suggested dinner at a restaurant on the edge of the city, one that wasn't filled with the usual crowd of high society guests. It was quieter, more intimate, and Lila felt a sense of peace as soon as she walked through the door. Victor stood at the entrance, waiting for her with a smile that made her heart skip a beat. You look beautiful tonight, he said, his voice soft but sincere. Lila smiled, a blush creeping up her neck. She had never been good at taking compliments, but with Victor, it felt different. She wasn't just the waitress, the invisible woman who took orders and refilled drinks. With him, she felt seen. Thank you, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. You look pretty amazing yourself. They sat at a small table near the window, the soft glow of candlelight casting a warm glow over their faces. The conversation flowed easily, as it always did when they were together. But tonight, there was a shift in the air, something unspoken that both of them could feel. Lila wasn't sure how to bring it up, but she knew it had to be said. Victor, I have to be honest with you, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I'm not sure I'm ready for all of this. For what it means to be with someone like you. Victor looked at her, his expression soft and understanding. He didn't push her, didn't try to convince her otherwise. Instead, he reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Lila, I get it. This is all new to you, and I don't want to rush you into anything. I'm not asking for anything that you're not ready for. I just want to be with you. His words were simple, but they hit Lila harder than she expected. She had always kept her guard up, always assumed that people would eventually disappoint her, and yet here was Victor, standing in front of her, offering her something real. She wasn't used to that. I've never let anyone in like this before, Lila confessed, her voice cracking slightly. I've spent my whole life building walls, keeping people out. And now, with you, I feel like maybe I'm supposed to let them down. But I'm scared. I'm scared that I'll lose myself. Victor squeezed her hand gently, his eyes filled with warmth. Lila, you don't have to lose yourself. You don't have to change who you are to be with me. All I want is to get to know the real you. I'm not asking for anything more. Lila looked at him, searching his eyes for any hint of insincerity, but all she saw was honesty. She had always been skeptical of people who seemed too perfect, but with Victor, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be afraid. Maybe she didn't have to hide anymore. I don't know if I can be the person you think I am, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'm willing to try. Victor smiled, his eyes lighting up. That's all I'm asking for. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, their conversation flowing easily as the evening went on. But for Lila, something had shifted. The walls she had built around herself were beginning to crack, and she wasn't sure what that meant. But she knew one thing for sure: being with Victor was different. It wasn't just about saving lives or being a part of his world. It was about something deeper, something that made her feel like she wasn't invisible anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As they left the restaurant, Victor took her hand again, his fingers gently brushing hers. I'm glad we talked, he said softly. Me too, Lila replied, her heart racing in her chest. I think we're just getting started. For the first time in a long time, Lila wasn't sure where this would all lead. But for the first time, she was ready to find out. Weeks had passed since Lila and Victor's last conversation, and things between them had changed in ways she couldn't quite explain. Every moment spent with him felt like a whirlwind, sweeping her up into a world that was foreign to her, yet somehow fitting. As much as she tried to keep her distance, to hold on to the simple life she had always known, she couldn't ignore the growing connection between them. There was something real here, something worth exploring, but it still terrified her. She had spent years building walls around her heart, hiding from the world and from people who might hurt her. But with Victor, the walls seemed to crumble, one brick at a time. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. Every time she saw him, every time they shared a quiet moment, she felt like she was learning to trust again. But what did it all mean? And was she really ready for what was happening between them? It was a Saturday afternoon when Victor called her. He had been traveling for work, and she hadn't seen him in a few days. Lila had missed him more than she cared to admit, but she didn't want to appear too eager. She wanted to maintain her independence, keep her feet on the ground. But when his name appeared on her phone, she couldn't help but smile. Hey, it's me, Victor said, his voice warm. I've got a few hours free. I was hoping we could meet up. Lila's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to reach out, not today. But the invitation made her feel like maybe things were moving in the right direction. She wanted to see him, but she also wanted to make sure she wasn't getting carried away. Sure, she replied, trying to sound casual. Where do you want to go? I thought we could just grab some coffee, Victor suggested. Something simple. Lila agreed, and within the hour, they were sitting at a small cafe on the edge of the city, away from the usual hustle and bustle. The quiet atmosphere gave them both a sense of peace, something they both seemed to crave. It's good to see you, Victor said, his eyes meeting hers. I've missed our talks. Lila smiled, a little shy. Me too. There was a moment of silence, a soft, comfortable one. They didn't need to say anything, yet everything felt clear. Lila wasn't sure if it was because of how much she had grown to care for him, or because she was still trying to figure out how to balance her feelings with the life she had always known. Either way, she was here, with him, and that meant something. I've been thinking about what you said the other night, Victor continued, his tone more serious now, about how you're not sure if you're ready for this, for everything that comes with being with someone like me. Lila looked down at her coffee, unsure of how to respond. She had meant what she said, but now, sitting here with him, she wasn't so sure. She had never been the type to let someone in, but with Victor, it was different. I know I said that, she said slowly, her voice quiet. But sometimes, I wonder if maybe I'm ready. Maybe it's just fear holding me back. Victor leaned forward slightly, his gaze soft. I understand that. I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm not asking for anything more than what you're willing to give. But I want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to push you into anything. Lila felt a weight lift off her shoulders at his words. She had always been afraid of losing herself, of becoming someone else in a relationship. But Victor's honesty reassured her. She didn't have to change for him. He just wanted to get to know the real her, the person she had kept hidden for so long. I don't know what the future holds, she said, meeting his eyes, but I do know that I care about you. More than I ever thought I would. Victor smiled, the warmth in his eyes making Lila's heart skip a beat. That's all I need to hear, he said softly. We'll take this one step at a time, Lila. No pressure. Just us, together. They sat there for a while, talking about everything and nothing, sharing moments of quiet understanding. Lila realized that she was starting to let go of her fears, starting to open up in ways she never thought possible. Victor wasn't like anyone else she had known. He wasn't perfect, but he was real. And for the first time in a long time, Lila felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. As they walked out of the cafe together, hand in hand, Lila couldn't help but smile. She didn't know what the future held, but she was willing to find out. And for the first time, she felt like she wasn't walking this path alone. The days turned into weeks, and Lila found herself navigating a world that felt both familiar and foreign. The connection with Victor had deepened, but as it did, so did her internal struggle. She had always kept her emotions guarded, maintaining a distance from people, especially men like him. But now, she was faced with a choice: to continue down this path with Victor, or to retreat back into the safety of her solitude. Victor had become a constant presence in her life, and she couldn't deny that she cared about him more than she had ever intended. Yet, every time she allowed herself to feel vulnerable, she felt the familiar tug of fear, the fear that somehow she would lose herself in him, in this world that wasn't hers. It was a Saturday evening when she met him again, this time at one of the more upscale restaurants he frequented. Lila had never been to places like this before, but she agreed to meet him, pushing aside the voices of doubt in her head. She arrived early, standing outside the restaurant, taking in the grand entrance and the polished elegance of the surroundings. It wasn't the kind of place she felt comfortable in, but tonight, she wasn't just a waitress. Tonight, she was with Victor. When she entered, she spotted him immediately, dressed in a tailored suit, his posture as confident as ever, but his smile was softer tonight, somehow warmer. "You're here," Victor said as he stood up to greet her, his eyes lighting up when they met hers. "I was starting to think you might change your mind." Lila smiled her, nerves easing as he took her hand. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." They sat at the table, the atmosphere around them quiet and intimate. The waiter brought them drinks, and for a moment, they just sat there, looking at each other in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, just the opposite. It was the kind of silence that only came when two people were truly present with each other, when words weren't necessary. "I've been thinking a lot," Victor said after a few moments, breaking the silence. "About what you said last time, about taking things one step at a time." Lila's heart skipped a beat. She had expected him to be more casual, more relaxed about their relationship, but he seemed to be just as thoughtful as she was. "I'm glad you're willing to take it slow," he continued, his voice steady. "But I need to be honest with you, Lila." Lila leaned in slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "What is it?" she asked, her heart racing. "I want to be with you," Victor said, his gaze unwavering. "I want to make this work, but I need to know that you're ready for it. That you're not just doing this because you feel obligated or because you feel sorry for me." Lila felt a pang of guilt, her chest tightening. She had never felt obligated to be with him. In fact, it was the opposite. She had pushed him away so many times, fearing that getting close to him would only lead to heartbreak. "I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm doing this because I want to. I want to see where this goes, but I'm scared." Victor reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. "I know you're scared," he said softly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "And that's okay. I'm scared too. But what I'm asking is that we don't let that fear control us. I don't want you to be afraid of what might happen. I want you to trust that we can figure this out together." Lila looked down at their hands, the warmth of his touch grounding her. She had spent so long running from her fears, building walls around herself to protect her heart. But now, sitting across from Victor, she realized that maybe, just maybe she didn't need those walls anymore. "I want to trust you," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "I just don't know if I can let go of the fear." Victor squeezed her hand, offering a reassuring smile. "You don't have to let go of everything at once," he said. "Just take it one day at a time. That's all I'm asking." Lila nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. It wasn't perfect. There were still doubts, still fears lurking in the back of her mind, but she was willing to try. She had spent so long guarding herself, but maybe it was time to let someone in. Maybe it was time to let Victor in. As the night wore on, the conversation turned from serious to lighthearted, and Lila found herself laughing with him more than she ever had before. It felt easy, natural, like they had always known each other. By the time the evening ended, she didn't want to leave. She didn't want to return to her quiet, solitary life. For the first time in a long time, Lila felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. "Thank you for tonight," she said as they walked out of the restaurant together. Victor smiled, his arm brushing against hers. "Thank you for being here," he said. "I think we're just getting started, Lila." For the first time in what felt like forever, Lila believed him. The days that followed were filled with quiet moments of reflection for Lila. She had spent so much of her life shielding herself from the world, from people, from anything that could hurt her. Yet here she was, with Victor, someone she had never imagined she'd be with. He had become a part of her life in a way she couldn't deny. It wasn't just about saving him that day. It wasn't just the instant connection that had been forged in the aftermath of the scaffolding accident. It was more than that. It was the way he looked at her, like she was worth something, like she mattered. Victor had been patient, understanding, and kind. Every time she doubted herself, he was there, offering reassurance, making her feel seen, heard, and most importantly, safe. It was a feeling Lila hadn't realized she craved until now. She had always thought she could handle everything on her own, that needing anyone would somehow make her weak. But with Victor, it was different. He didn't make her feel like she was giving up her independence. Instead, he made her feel stronger, more capable. Still, the fear lingered. Deep down, she was terrified of what this meant for her future. She wasn't sure how to navigate this new chapter in her life, this new version of herself. One minute she felt like she was ready to take a leap of faith, and the next, she was scared of falling. It wasn't just about being with Victor. It was about trusting herself, trusting that she was worthy of love, of being cared for in a way she had never allowed anyone to do before. That Saturday evening, Victor called, as he always did, his voice smooth and calm as he asked her to meet him again. "Lila," he said, his tone gentle but filled with purpose. "I want you to know something." She listened, her heart already racing. "I've been thinking about us, about how everything feels so right when I'm with you. I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what. I want to keep going, to see where this takes us." Lila felt a wave of warmth wash over her, but there was also a pang of uncertainty in her chest. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this was real, that they were real. "Victor," she said softly, "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this. I don't know if I can let go of my fears." There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Victor spoke again. "You don't have to let go of everything right now, Lila. I'm not asking you to. I just need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. Take your time. I'm here, and I'm not rushing you." His words were exactly what she needed to hear. Lila had spent so long being afraid that she might lose herself, but here was Victor, assuring her that she didn't have to rush, that she didn't have to change to be with him. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she could take that step, one day at a time. She agreed to meet him later that evening. The usual quiet cafe where they had first met was now their place, their own corner of the world where everything felt calm and easy. Lila arrived, her heart pounding in her chest as she walked through the door. There he was, waiting for her, as if nothing had changed. His smile was warm, inviting. He stood up to greet her, his eyes soft with affection. "You're here," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and happiness. "I've been thinking about you all day." "I've been thinking about you too," Lila replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. As they sat down, there was a new sense of understanding between them. It wasn't about rushing things or trying to fit into some perfect mold. It was about two people being real with each other, sharing their hopes, their fears, their dreams. The conversation came easily, as it always did. There was no tension, no uncomfortable pauses. Just two people who were slowly learning to trust each other. As the night wore on, Lila felt something shift within herself. The fear that had once been all-consuming wasn't gone, but it didn't feel as powerful anymore. Maybe it was Victor's presence, the way he made her feel grounded, or maybe it was the simple truth that, for the first time, she wasn't alone in her journey. By the time the evening came to an end, they were standing outside the cafe, the cool night air swirling around them. Lila looked up at Victor, a sense of clarity settling in her heart. "I'm not sure what the future holds," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "But I'm ready to try, to see where this goes." Victor smiled, his eyes filled with warmth and understanding. "That's all I can ask for," he said softly. "One step at a time." Lila nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. She didn't have all the answers, and she wasn't sure what would happen next. But she was ready to take that first step with Victor, ready to see where this journey would lead them both. And for the first time, she didn't feel alone. Lila woke up the next morning with a strange sense of peace. The heaviness that had been weighing on her for weeks, the fear of what was happening between her and Victor, was starting to lift. It was still there, lingering in the background, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't carrying it alone. The night before had been a turning point. She had admitted to herself that she wasn't ready to jump into something with both feet, but she was ready to try. That was enough. As she stood in her small apartment, getting ready for her shift, she realized just how far she had come. A few months ago, she had never imagined she would be here, feeling the way she did now. Her life had been simple, predictable. It had been just her, working day in and day out, keeping to herself. But Victor had entered her world and turned everything upside down. And while she still wasn't sure what the future held, she knew she was ready to face it, ready to face whatever came with being with him. That afternoon, she arrived at the restaurant to start her shift, and as always, the day was filled with the usual bustle. But there was a difference today. There was a lightness to her step, a sense of confidence she hadn't felt before. As she moved through the dining area, taking orders and serving food, she found herself smiling more, her thoughts drifting to Victor and the connection they were building. He had become a constant presence in her life, and it felt right. The evening came, and after her shift, Lila was expecting to have a quiet night to herself. But when she checked her phone, she saw a message from Victor. "I've been thinking about you all day. I know it's last minute, but I'd love to see you again, if you're free." Lila's heart fluttered as she read the message. She had known they would see each other again soon, but the reality of it still made her nervous. She had so many questions. Was she truly ready for this? Could she really let go of her fears? She stared at the phone screen for a moment, the weight of the decision settling in. She knew she didn't want to walk away from him, but was she ready to open her heart completely? She texted back, a slight hesitation in her fingers as she typed, "I'd love to see you too. How about dinner at that little cafe you like?" The response was immediate. "Perfect. I'll see you at 7. Lila put her phone down, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her chest. She wasn't sure what to expect from tonight, but she knew one thing for certain. She wanted to be with Victor. No more holding back, no more running from her feelings. When she arrived at the cafe, she found him already there, waiting for her at their usual table. He stood up as she entered, his smile widening when their eyes met. "I was starting to think you'd changed your mind," he said with a teasing smile, but there was a warmth behind his words that made Lila's heart skip a beat. "I wouldn't leave you hanging," she replied, her voice light. As she sat down across from him, she noticed the way he was looking at her, intently, like he was trying to read her, to see if she was still unsure. Lila met his gaze, her mind racing with thoughts, with uncertainties, but for once, she let them go. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her voice steady, "and I realize that I'm not ready to give up on this, on us." Victor's expression softened, his hand reaching across the table to gently touch hers. "I never asked you to give up anything," he said quietly. "I just want to be with you, and I want to make sure that you know I'm here, no matter what." Lila felt the sincerity in his words, the honesty, and for the first time, she felt like she didn't have to hide. There was no pressure, no expectation. He just wanted her, and that was all that mattered. "I'm not perfect," Lila said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have my fears, my doubts, but I know I'm ready to face them. With you." Victor smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "We don't have to be perfect," he said. "We just have to be real with each other." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation and laughter. They talked about everything, about their lives, their pasts, their hopes for the future. For once, Lila didn't feel like she was living in the shadows. With Victor, she felt like she could be herself, completely. As the evening came to an end, they walked outside together, the cool night air wrapping around them. Lila felt a sense of calm, a certainty in her heart. For the first time, she didn't feel the weight of her past, her fears, holding her back. She was ready to move forward. "I don't know what the future holds," she said quietly, her hand slipping into his, "but I want to see where this goes. With you." Victor stopped walking for a moment, turning to face her. "So do I," he said, his voice low, full of emotion. "And I'll be here, every step of the way." Lila smiled, her heart swelling with a mix of hope and gratitude. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. And that was enough. As the months passed, Lila and Victor's relationship blossomed in ways neither of them could have anticipated. The initial uncertainty, the lingering fears that had haunted Lila for so long, began to fade as she learned to embrace the new chapter of her life. Victor had always been patient, giving her the space she needed while proving to her that she could trust him. The walls she had built around her heart were no longer as impenetrable. For the first time in years, Lila felt like she was living for something more than just survival. She was truly living. Their time together was filled with small, meaningful moments, long walks through the city, quiet evenings spent cooking dinner together, and heartfelt conversations that lasted well into the night. Every time they spoke, Lila felt like she was learning more about herself, about what it meant to open up to someone. Victor never pushed her, never tried to rush her into anything she wasn't ready for. He understood her more than anyone ever had. One chilly afternoon in early fall, Victor invited Lila to spend the weekend with him at his family's house upstate. It was the first time she would be meeting his family, and while she was nervous, she also couldn't shake the feeling that it was the next step in their journey together. They drove up together, the countryside passing by in a blur of autumn colors as they talked about everything and nothing. Victor's hand was resting on hers, his fingers occasionally brushing over her skin in a way that made her heart race. She had never imagined herself in a relationship like this, but now, everything felt so natural. When they arrived at the house, nestled in the woods with a view of the lake, Lila felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Victor's family was warm and welcoming, and his parents made her feel like she had always been part of their world. Lila couldn't help but feel a little out of place at first, but Victor was by her side, constantly reassuring her. He introduced her to his younger sister, a woman with a sharp wit and a warm heart, and his brother, who was easy to talk to. As the evening wore on, Lila realized that these people, despite their wealth and influence, were just like any other family, full of love, laughter, and genuine connection. She had spent so much of her life assuming that people like Victor's family were unapproachable, but now she saw how wrong she had been. They were kind, down-to-earth, and accepting, and she felt herself relax in their company. Later that night, after dinner and conversation had turned to more casual topics, Victor took her outside for a walk along the lake. The moon was full, casting a silver glow over the water. It was peaceful here, a stark contrast to the hustle and bustle of the city. "How are you feeling?" Victor asked, his voice low and tender as he walked beside her. Lila smiled, looking out over the water. I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Victor stopped walking and turned to face her. His expression was serious now, his eyes searching hers. "Lila, I want you to know something. I've never been more sure about anything in my life. I'm ready to take the next step with you, if you're ready." Her heart skipped a beat, and she looked at him, her chest tight with emotion. She had never been one to open up about her feelings so freely, but with Victor, it felt right. "I'm ready," she said quietly, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating at the same time. Victor smiled, a smile full of relief and affection. He reached out to take her hands in his, and for the first time, Lila didn't feel the need to hold back. She didn't need to be afraid of losing herself because with Victor, she realized she had found a version of herself she never knew existed. They stood there in the quiet of the night, the world around them. Still and peaceful. Everything felt perfect in that moment, like they were on the brink of something beautiful, something real. As they kissed beneath the stars, Lila realized that love wasn't something she had to chase or force. It was something that had come to her when she least expected it, something she had been ready for all along. With Victor, she didn't have to be afraid of what came next. She didn't have to hide anymore. She was ready to live, truly live, with him by her side. And in that moment, she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, one step at a time.